She looked at me and smiled, then said, "You're not leaving early, right?" I laughed before I caught myself, because that is not a question you ask a stranger unless somebody has left early on you before. More than once, probably. My name is Ethan. I'm 34, and up until that Friday night, I had sworn off blind dates the way some men swear off gas station sushi. Once was enough to teach the lesson. My sister set this one up. Her name is Grace, and she works with a woman named Sophie at the hospital billing office. And for 3 straight months, Grace had been dropping Sophie's name into every conversation like she was seasoning a meal I hadn't asked for. She's funny. She's kind. She's been through a rough divorce and deserves somebody decent. I kept saying no, mostly because the last blind date I went on ended with the woman checking her phone under the table for 45 minutes and then telling me she had an early flight she did not have. But Grace does not quit easily. She wore me down over a Sunday dinner, and I finally said fine. 1 dinner, 1 hour. If it's bad, I'm gone. That's how I ended up standing outside a little Italian place downtown at 7 p.m. sharp, wearing the one collared shirt I own that doesn't have sawdust ground into the fabric, feeling like a man walking into a job interview he didn't study for. I saw her before she saw me. She was sitting at a two-top near the window, hands wrapped around a water glass, hair down around her shoulders, wearing a green dress that looked like she'd put more thought into it than she wanted to admit. She looked up when the door chimed and our eyes caught, and for a second neither of us moved. Then she smiled, that same smile that would end up meaning 100 different things to me over the following months, and she said the line, "You're not leaving early, right?" I sat down across from her before I answered. "Depends how bad the wine is." "The wine is fine. I already tried it while I was waiting for you to work up the nerve to walk in." I wasn't nervous. "You stood outside for 4 minutes." I timed it. That was Sophie, 29 years old, sharp as a paper cut, and completely unwilling to let a single sentence pass without turning it over first to see if there was something funnier hiding underneath. I found out later she'd had 3 dates in the past year that ended with the man ghosting somewhere between the appetizer and the check, which was why she'd led with that question. She wasn't joking, not entirely. She was testing the water before she put her whole hand in. We ordered too much food because neither of us wanted to be the one who said, "Let's wrap this up." She told me about growing up 2 towns over, about a marriage that ended quietly after 4 years because they'd become roommates who occasionally shared a bed, about how her ex-husband had been a decent enough man who simply stopped trying somewhere around year 2 and never started again. She said it without bitterness, just tired honesty, the kind that only comes from somebody who has already done the crying and is now just stating facts. I told her about my contracting business, about the 2 guys who worked under me, about how my last real relationship ended when my girlfriend decided small-town life wasn't big enough for the future she wanted. I didn't dress any of it up. She didn't ask me to. Somewhere around the 2nd glass of wine, she leaned forward and said, "Okay, be honest with me. Did your sister bribe you to come tonight?" She threatened to tell our mother I was becoming a hermit. "That's not a bribe, that's blackmail." Semantics. She laughed, the real kind, the kind that made the couple at the next table glance over. "Well, for the record, Grace didn't have to threaten me. I actually wanted to meet you. Even after 3 failed setups this year." Her smile faltered just slightly, just enough for me to catch it before she covered it back up. "You heard about those." Grace mentioned a guy who left during dessert to, quote, "take a call that never ended." That one still stings a little. His loss. She looked at me for a second too long after that, like she was deciding whether I meant it or whether it was just something men say at dinner to sound better than they are. I meant it. I just didn't know yet how much I'd end up meaning it. Dinner ran almost 3 hours, which neither of us noticed until the waiter started giving us the polite look that means the kitchen wants to close. We walked out into a cool night, and she stood on the sidewalk hugging her arms around herself. And I offered my jacket without thinking too hard about it, and she took it without arguing, which told me more than any of the conversation had. "So," she said, pulling the jacket around her shoulders, "did I pass?" "You're asking me that like this was an interview. Every first date is an interview. We're both just too polite to admit it." "Fine. You passed." "Barely." "Barely?" "You made fun of my shirt choice within the first 10 minutes. That's a mark against you." It was a fair critique. We stood there a minute longer, neither of us reaching for a goodbye, until she finally said she should get going, and I walked her to her car, and at the door she turned and said, "I had a really good time, Ethan." I wasn't expecting to. Same. Mostly the second part. That got a real laugh out of her, and she drove off, and I stood in that parking lot for longer than I want to admit, feeling like something had shifted that I wasn't fully ready to name yet. The second date happened 5 days later, and it was less careful than the first. We went for coffee that turned into a walk along the river that turned into 2 hours of sitting on a bench watching the water while she told me about her job, about the things patients said to her on the phone that broke her heart a little at a time, about how she'd started keeping a small notebook of the kind ones just so she had something to read on the bad days. I told her about the house I was flipping on the east side, about how I liked the moment in every renovation when the ugly stuff was torn out, and you could finally see what the place was actually built from underneath all the bad decisions somebody else had made. "That's a very on-the-nose metaphor for you," she said. I didn't say it was a metaphor. You didn't have to. By the third date, she brought up her ex-husband without me asking, which I took as a good sign. She said the hardest part of the divorce wasn't the sadness. It was the boredom that came after, the long stretch of evenings where she didn't know what to do with herself because she'd built her whole rhythm around another person, and now that person was gone, and she was just standing in her own kitchen wondering what came next. She said she'd started going to a pottery class on Tuesday nights, just to have somewhere to be. "Are you any good?" I asked. "Every single bowl I've made looks like it's had a stroke." "That's oddly specific." "They're oddly specific bowls." I laughed so hard I had to put my coffee down, and she watched me with this look on her face, half amused, half like she was filing the moment away somewhere she could find it later. Things moved steady after that. Not fast, not slow, just steady in the way that felt like it was actually built on something instead of just excitement burning itself out. We had dinner at her place, where I discovered she alphabetized her spice rack and owned exactly one skillet she trusted, and she had dinner at mine, where she discovered I owned 4 skillets and trusted none of them equally. We argued once, over something small, over whether she'd canceled plans too casually 2 weekends in a row, and she didn't get defensive. She just said, "You're right. I've been doing that. I do that when I get scared things are going well, and I'm sorry." I didn't expect that kind of honesty. I wasn't used to it. Around month 3, her ex-husband resurfaced. Not dramatically, just a text out of nowhere asking if she wanted to grab coffee sometime. Catch up. No pressure. She showed it to me before she answered it, which told me everything I needed to know about where I stood, and I told her that was her call to make, not mine, and she said she didn't want to make it alone, and we talked it through together, and she wrote back a polite no that didn't leave any door open. "Are you upset I told you?" she asked afterward. "I'm relieved you told me. Different men would have been upset either way. I'm not particularly interested in being different men." She smiled at that one for a long time. By month 5, she'd started leaving things at my place. A toothbrush first, then a hoodie, then a stack of paperback novels. She said she was tired of hauling back and forth. I didn't say anything about it. I didn't have to. It was the kind of thing that just accumulated the way trust does, one small object at a time, until one day you look around and realize the space has changed shape around another person without anybody making an announcement about it. The night I proposed wasn't fancy, because neither of us really wanted fancy. We were sitting on my back porch on a Saturday in late fall, both of us wrapped in blankets against the cold, drinking coffee that had gone lukewarm because we were too busy talking to remember it existed. She was telling me about a bowl she'd finally made in pottery class that hadn't collapsed, and how proud she was of it even though it was crooked and a little too thick on one side. And I looked at her laughing about her own crooked bowl and thought, I don't want a single ordinary evening after this one that doesn't have her in it. I didn't have a ring in my pocket. I hadn't planned it for that night specifically. I just said it, the way you say true things when you finally stop overthinking them. Marry me. She stopped mid-sentence, coffee halfway to her mouth. That's a very abrupt subject change. I know. You don't have a ring. I have a Tuesday appointment at a jewelry store and zero doubt about the answer I want. She set her coffee down slow, like she needed both hands free for what came next, and she looked at me the way she had that very first night across the table, testing whether I meant it before she let herself believe it. You're serious. I have never been more serious about anything in my life, including the 4 skillets. She laughed, and it turned into something closer to crying halfway through, and she said yes before I even got the chance to properly ask the question the second time, the real time, with a ring, on a Tuesday 2 weeks later at that same jewelry store, in front of a bored clerk who clapped anyway. We got married the following spring, small ceremony, close friends, Grace crying more than either of us. Sophie's crooked bowl sits on our mantel now, right in the middle, because she says a marriage should have room in it for the things that don't come out perfect the first time and get loved anyway. Sometimes late at night, I think back to that first question she asked me before I'd even sat down. You're not leaving early, right? I understand it differently now than I did that night. It wasn't really about the dinner. It was about every time before me that somebody had left without warning, without explanation, without giving her the decency of a real goodbye. I think about that question every single day, and every single day my answer is the same one I gave without knowing yet how much it would matter. I'm not leaving. Not early, not late, not ever. Would you have shown up to that blind date after 3 failed setups in 1 year? And do you think the crooked bowl belongs on that mantle? Or am I just a sentimental fool who married a woman with questionable pottery skills? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story meant something to you, hit like, subscribe, and share it with somebody who still believes in a good blind date story. I'll see you in the next one.